visible edge of the partial head count sheet carries 8 names. Beneath them, in faded ink, the final line has been cut away. The remaining mark is only the upper curve of a numeral. It could be nothing. It could be the beginning of 9. The season began without an incident anyone considered worth recording. The counselors gathered the children before supper. They checked the cabins, the paths, and the fire ring. The Appalachian air held a cold salt wind from the distant ridges, though the nearest water was far below the camp. Paper moved against paper on a clipboard. A battery lantern gave off a thin electrical hiss. There were 8 identified campers. That number appears on the roster. It appears in the available photographs. It appears in several ordinary references to meals, swimming groups, and cabin assignments. The names are not in dispute within the surviving file. The first spoken count was different. According to the counselor's later account, the children stood in a loose line near the gathering area. The counselor read the names once. Then the children shifted places. One stepped behind another. A second count followed. The counselor reached 8, paused, and said 9. The account does not describe a face. It does not identify a voice, a coat, or a child standing apart from the group. It describes the number as an error noticed only after it had been spoken. The counselor checked the line again. 8 children answered. No one was missing. At the time, the mistake had an ordinary explanation. Evening light was fading. The children were moving. The counselor was tired. A count made under those conditions could be wrong. The public version begins there and ends there. In later retellings, the extra child becomes a camp legend. The number is treated as a joke or as a story passed between counselors until repetition gives it weight. The camp's history places the matter beside an older accident or disappearance, but does not connect the two. The surviving public account offers no name for the child and no cause for the count. The records are less neat. The daily attendance sheets do not always preserve the spoken number. Most leave a space for a total and contain a mark that can be read as 8. Some spaces are blank. One form lists the identified campers, but leaves the total line unfinished. The handwriting changes in the margins. In one place, a pencil has been pressed hard enough to break the paper without leaving a readable word. That omission matters because the count was not remembered by only one counselor. Other counselors later reported reaching 9. Their descriptions do not match in every detail. One remembered the count during the evening gathering. Another placed it near the cabins. A third recalled no visible extra child at all. They agreed on the pause before the number was spoken. They agreed that the roster contained 8. The photographs create another boundary. In the available images, the ordinary group appears as expected. The children stand near the gathering area, on a path, and beside the cabins. No photograph clearly shows a 9th child. That absence does not prove the child was never present. It proves only that the camera records no such figure in the surviving images. The paper trail becomes thinner, where the memory becomes more consistent. A line is missing from an attendance ledger near the period associated with the older disappearance. The closure material refers to that gap, but does not explain it. The statement is brief. The public account is broader, cleaner, and less specific. Somewhere between those versions, the camp stopped treating the number as a mistake and began preserving it as a story. The sealed box contains the last surviving testimony connected to the closure. It also contains the partial sheet with the damaged final line. Until that testimony is examined, the records establish only this: 8 children were identified, 9 were repeatedly counted, and the documents fail at the points where the count should be easiest to verify. If the 9th child was only a legend, why does the paper trail become thinner each time the number appears? The missing line did not end the inquiry. It changed its direction. The next useful record was not a form, it was a damaged audio reel. The reel had been stored with other camp materials. Its label was faded. The writing identified an evening count, but not the full date. A portion of the tape had been stretched or recorded over. The remaining voice was clear enough to identify the speaker as one of the counselors, though the surviving file does not preserve a name with certainty. The recording begins in ordinary conditions. There is room noise, a low electrical hiss. Something metallic shifts at a distance. The counselor speaks toward another person or toward the machine itself. The words are measured. The children are being gathered after the evening activity. The count is routine. 1, then 2. The voice continues through the identified group. Nothing in the tone suggests alarm. The counselor is doing what the forms required. Confirm the children. Confirm the number. Return them to their cabins. Then, the voice stops. It does not stop at the end of a sentence. It pauses between numbers. The silence is short, but deliberate. In the account, later given by the counselor, this was the moment when the count seemed to change. The written statement calls it hesitation. Another counselor remembered it as listening. The tape preserves the pause. It also preserves a sound beneath it. At first, the sound could be mistaken for tape damage. A thin pulse rises through the hiss. It is not loud. It has no clear voice. It resembles a brief electrical response from an old radio or intercom. Then it fades. The counselor resumes counting. The number 9 follows. There is no recorded name after it. No correction. No explanation. The voice does not say that another child has arrived. It does not describe a person standing apart from the group. It simply reaches a number that Tahi roster cannot support. That distinction matters. A witness account is not the same as a head count sheet. The sheet records names. The witness remembers a spoken total. One can be wrong while the other remains accurate. But this was not one account from one tired person at the end of one long day. Other counselors later described the same sequence. They did not agree on every detail. One remembered the count taking place near the gathering area. Another placed it closer to the path leading toward the cabins. Their recollections of the weather differed. So did their descriptions of where the children were standing. They agreed on 3 points. There were 8 identified children. The count reached 9. And there was a pause before the 9th number. That agreement may have come from shared camp language. A story can settle into memory and make separate recollections sound alike. The investigators who preserved these accounts did not establish whether the counselors had discussed the incident before being interviewed. The records do not provide that control. Still, the reel changes the problem. A repeat D number can be copied from one person to another. A repeated pause is harder to explain without a trigger. It could have been a sound. It could have been a movement. It could have been a rule learned by the staff and forgotten by the people who later repeated it. The recording itself offers only a narrow clue. After the pause, the electrical pulse returns. It is brief. The interval between the first pulse and the second is not exact enough to establish a mechanical cycle. Damage to the tape may have altered the timing. The reel has no reliable time code. Its speed may not be original. For now, the sound can be described only as recurring, not a message, not proof of a person nearby. A signal heard twice on a damaged recording. The camp had ordinary equipment capable of producing noise. The maintenance papers refer generally to radios, wiring, and service points, but the surviving pages do not map every connection. Some equipment was portable, some was old. Nothing in the available record identifies the source of the pulse. This is where the witness account meets the missing logs. The counselors remember Ed account. The reel preserves a pause and a sound. The written forms preserve names, but not always the total spoken aloud. Near the period connected with the older child's disappearance, one ledger line is absent altogether. No surviving document says who removed it. No witness account establishes that the counselors understood what they were hearing. They may have interpreted the pause as distraction. They may have counted a child who was not physically in the group. They may have responded to a cue that had become part of the camp's evening routine. Those are theories, not findings. The finding is smaller and more troubling. The 9th number was not preserved as a single mistake. It appeared in separate accounts. The pause before it was remembered more than once. On the reel, something interrupts the ordinary electrical hiss at nearly the same point in the count. The tape ends before the counselor explains what happened next. There is a scrape, a breath close to the microphone, then the recording drops into static. If the 9th count was only a legend, why did the counselors seem to hear something before they said it? The reel had ended in static. The paper records ended in gaps. The next step was not another account, but the ground itself. The surviving maps were spread across a table under a white work light. Their edges had gone soft with age. Faded ink marked cabins, paths, water lines, and maintenance points. Some lines were clear. Others had been rubbed thin by folding. The public camp map showed a simple arrangement. The cabins stood apart from the main gathering area. A path ran between them. The utility building sat beyond the ordinary route. Nothing on that map suggested a place where a child could approach the evening count and disappear from a photograph. The maintenance diagrams were different. They were not drawn for visitors. They showed wiring runs, service access, and spaces that did not appear on the public map. One narrow route followed the rear side of a structure near the gathering area. It was marked in pencil, then crossed through in faded blue ink. A later sheet left the space blank. The record does not identify who changed it. The route was not a tunnel in the dramatic sense. It was a practical service passage. Part of it ran behind a wall. Part of it narrowed where the building met the slope. The floor was unfinished. Dust collected along the edges. Old staples held a cable against the boards. From inside that passage, a person could move close to the gathering area without using the main path. They could hear voices through the wall. They could remain outside the camera's ordinary view. That did not prove that anyone had used it during the count. It established only a possible route. The distinction mattered. The photographs had already raised the same problem. In each available image, the 8 identified campers occupied the expected positions. The counselors stood where the camera could see them. The background looked open at first glance. It was not entirely open. A section of wall, a storage corner, or the edge of the utility structure interrupted the view. The blind zone was small. It changed with the camera position. It was large enough to conceal a person standing close to the group, but not large enough to explain every account by itself. The photographers had not been careless. They had simply worked from the places people normally stood. That repeated position became important. The camera was placed along the same side of the gathering area in the surviving photographs. The evening count, according to the counselors, occurred from nearly the same direction. The missing view was therefore not random. It was built into the routine. The audio reel added another detail. The brief electrical pulse appeared just before the hesitation. The witnesses had remembered the pause as a feeling, or as a moment when the count seemed to catch. The recording suggested a more ordinary possibility. They may have heard something first. The signal was quiet. It could have come through a radio, a wire, or a speaker hidden near the service route. The surviving maintenance records confirm that the camp had radios, wiring, and service points. They do not identify the equipment that produced the pulse. Still, the timing narrowed the question. The counselors did not simply decide to say 9. They counted the children they could identify. They reached 8. Then something occurred. A sound. A movement. A cue. After that, the number 9 entered the sequence. The partial attendance sheet was found among the folded papers from the earlier file. Its upper portion was missing, The remaining line showed the ordinary names of the 8 campers. Below them, the ink broke off near the margin. There was no complete 9th name. There was also no clean blank space. The writing had been cut away with the paper. The torn edge passed through the bottom of the form, leaving only a short mark beneath the final identified entry. It might have been a notation. It might have been the beginning of another name. The fragment could not establish either conclusion. The sheet did establish that the missing line was not merely absent from a later copy. At least one original form had contained more writing than the surviving portion now showed. The attendance record and the structural diagram were not proof of one event. They were separate records with separate weaknesses. One preserved an incomplete line. The other preserved a route that had been removed from the public map. Together, they made the old explanation less complete. The camp legend required a tired counselor and a counting error. It did not require a service passage. It did not require a damaged line in an attendance sheet. It did not explain why the photographs shared the same blind zone. The investigators compared the measurements carefully. The passage could carry a person, but not easily. At one point, the ceiling dropped. At another, the boards had warped. Movement would have produced friction against wood or a soft impact on the floor. That sound could have traveled through the wall. The audio reel contained a faint disturbance after the electrical pulse. It was too damaged to identify with confidence. It might have been tape damage. It might have been a footstep. It might have been a shift in the recording equipment itself. The evidence could not decide. The counselors also disagreed about where the 9th child had seemed to be. One remembered the edge of the group. Another remembered looking toward the path. A third described the count as though someone had joined from behind. Their details did not align. Their hesitation did. That was the pattern now. The accounts differed where memory was vulnerable. They agreed at the point where a sound, a pause, and a number entered the routine. The maps showed a route near the same routine. The photographs showed a repeated blind zone. The attendance sheet showed a line that no longer existed. None of this identified the child. It did suggest that the count may have been attached to movement through the camp, rather than to a visible figure standing among the campers. A person could have used the route. Someone could have known where the cameras were placed. Someone could have understood the timing of the evening count. The altered diagram made one fact harder to dismiss. The route had been known to the camp before it disappeared from the public account. But who had crossed it during the count? And why was the passage removed from the map only after the old disappearance? The passage changed the meaning of the damaged attendance sheet. Before the map was compared with the photographs, the torn line could be treated as clerical damage. The paper had been folded. The lower edge was missing. The remaining marks did not form a complete name. Afterward, the damage looked more deliberate. The route had been built for service work. It ran beside the gathering area, behind a wall of rough boards and old utility panels. It was narrow in places. A person carrying a coil of wire could use it. A child could pass through it more easily. The public map showed no such route. That omission mattered, because the older disappearance occurred near the same part of the camp. The surviving file does not tell the story in one voice. It is a bundle of statements, forms, and copied notices. Some pages were prepared for officials. Others appear to have been written for the camp's own records. Their language changes when the missing child is mentioned. In the public account, the child was involved in an accident. The wording is cautious. It does not describe a confirmed death. It does not establish a body, a final sighting, or a complete search. It places the event within the ordinary confusion of a summer camp. The older file is less settled than the legend suggests. One report describes a child missing after an evening movement between the gathering area and the cabins. Another refers to a delay in the head count. A third uses a different description of the same child. The differences may have come from hurried reporting. They may also show that the camp was trying to keep two versions of the event apart. The child connected to that earlier disappearance is not identified here by a secure, consistent name. The file preserves a name in one place and a second name in another. The second name is written in a hand associated with a former camp official or staff member. It is not presented as a nickname. It is not marked as a correction. It appears as though the person writing already expected the reader to understand the connection. That expectation is the first sign of a concealed relationship. The name does not prove who the child was. It does not prove that the child entered the service passage. It does not establish what happened after the last confirmed sighting. Those conclusions would go beyond the record. But the duplicate name changes the question. The issue is no longer only why a child disappeared. It is why a camp record would carry two identities for someone whose disappearance should have required one clear account. The attendance ledger provides the next comparison. On the page covering the relevant evening, the routine entries continue in a regular column. 8 identified campers are present. Their names are written in the same faded ink found on other forms. The strokes are quick, but consistent. A mark appears beside each name. Then there is a gap. It is not an empty space at the bottom of the page. It falls where an additional line would normally have continued the count. The line is missing from the surviving sheet. The paper has been torn across the lower margin, leaving only part of the writing above it. The remaining fragment does not preserve a 9th name. It preserves enough to show that something was written. The closure material treats this as a damaged form. That is the official description. There is no statement explaining when the damage occurred or who had custody of the sheet when it was found. A theory of accidental tearing remains possible. The sheet may have caught on a nail. It may have been pulled from a binder. It may have deteriorated in storage. The difficulty is timing. The missing line coincides with the old disappearance. The route omitted from the public map also passes near the place where the evening movement was recorded. And the second name appears in the same body of material that later describes the camp's closure. No single item proves a plan. Together, they suggest that the record was not merely incomplete. It was managed. The former official connected to the second name appears in several different roles across the surviving pages. In one document, the person is described as responsible for camp operations. In another, the person is listed as a witness. In the closure material, the role becomes less specific. This is not an unusual change in old paperwork. Titles shift. Memories narrow. Administrative forms use different categories. Still, the pattern is difficult to ignore. The person closest to the camp's movement, records becomes less visible as the account becomes more formal. There is no surviving confession. There is no direct statement saying the route was used to conceal a child. There is no verified record of an exchange, a payment, or an outside arrangement. The evidence supports concealment of information. It does not yet establish the full purpose of that concealment. The most practical explanation is also the least dramatic. Someone may have been protecting an arrangement that depended on controlled movement. A child may have been moved without being entered correctly. A staff member may have feared that a second identity would expose a relationship the camp wanted kept private. The old disappearance may have been described as an accident because an accident required fewer questions than a missing person. That is a reconstruction, not a finding. The records do establish one narrower point. The camp's administration had a reason to keep names and routes from aligning. The service passage makes that possible. From the gathering area, the public path led toward the cabins. The concealed route offered another direction. A person using it could remain close to the group while avoiding the camera positions preserved in the photographs. The walls and utility structures created the same blind zone in picture after picture. The child counted by the counselors did not need to stand in the center of the group to affect the count. A movement behind the wall could be mistaken for a child rejoining the line. A voice could come from the passage. A signal could direct attention toward the cabins while someone moved the other way. The audio reel supports only part of this reconstruction. It captures a pause before the number 9 and a recurring disturbance near the evening count. The recording does not identify the source. It does not contain a clear instruction. It does not name the missing child. But the timing is consistent with a signal used during movement. That detail makes the old file harder to dismiss as a simple clerical failure. The second name appears again on a copied page near the closure records. The ink is faded. The surrounding text is incomplete. What remains indicates that the official or staff member knew of the earlier identity and had authority over the account that followed. The exact relationship is not stated. It could have been family. It could have been an employment connection. It could have involved an informal arrangement that the camp did not want examined after the disappearance. The surviving evidence cannot choose among those possibilities. What it can show is a pattern of control. The route disappears from the public map. The attendance line disappears from the ledger. The child's identity shifts. The official account moves from uncertainty to legend. Years later, counselors begin counting 8 children and then 9. The repeated count may have started as a practical signal. It may have been a response trained into the camp's evening routine. It may have been an error reinforced by the story told afterward, or it may contain a detail that the surviving records still cannot explain. The former official's final testimony is supposed to clarify the matter. It was sealed with the closure material and kept apart from the ordinary camp records. The box containing it remains the most direct surviving statement from someone connected to the camp's final account. Until that testimony is read, the human explanation has a limit. The passage shows how someone could move unseen. The damaged sheet shows where the written count breaks. The second name shows that the older disappearance involved more than one identity. None of them reveals who decided that the 9th child should be counted, but not recorded. And one question remains fixed between the old disappearance and the present reports. Was the 9th child a person being hidden? Or was the count itself a signal used to make everyone look in the wrong direction? The records do not show a single event. They show a sequence. At the end of the evening meal, the children were gathered near the main meeting area. The counselors brought them in from the cabins and from the paths that led down toward the utility buildings. The air moved cold through the trees. Salt wind came up from the distant ridge, carrying the smell of wet leaves and old smoke. The first count was ordinary. 8 names were called. 8 children answered. The surviving roster supports that number. The photographs support it too. The attendance sheets, when they are complete, support it without hesitation. Then came the pause. One counselor remembered it as a moment of distraction. Another described it as a break in the rhythm, as if the person counting had looked past the group. The audio reel preserves only a damaged portion of the exchange. The voice is low. The tape carries a thin electrical hiss. The count reaches 8. There is a gap. After the gap, the number 9 appears. The recording does not preserve a clear 9th voice. It does not identify a child. It does not show who, if anyone, stood beyond the circle. What it preserves is the timing. The pause came before the extra number, and the pause was not random. The same order appears in the witness accounts. Gathering, count, silence, a sound from somewhere near the service side of the grounds. Then the second count, or the corrected count, reaching 9. The language changes from one account to the next. One counselor recalled a faint knock. Another remembered a short burst through a radio. A third spoke of something that seemed to travel inside the wall rather than across open ground. Their descriptions do not agree on the source. They agree on when it happened. That distinction matters. A memory can borrow details from another memory, A camp legend can supply a shape to an uncertain recollection, but a repeated position in a sequence is harder to dismiss. It suggests that the witnesses were not simply telling the same story. They may have been responding to the same cue. The reel offers the most concrete version of that cue. Its audio is damaged by age and handling. The machine motor wavers. The tape surface has a rough, uneven texture. Beneath the spoken count is a recurring disturbance. It arrives close to the same stage of the evening routine. The sound is brief. It has no stable identity. It could be a radio transmission, a contact in an old electrical circuit, a knock against a hollow surface, or movement recorded at a distance. The record cannot decide among those possibilities. It can establish repetition. When the disturbance is placed against the testimony, the evening count takes on a practical shape. The counselors gathered the children. Someone called the names. The count stopped at 8. A signal occurred near the concealed service route. Attention shifted. Movement followed, or was expected to follow. Then the number 9 was spoken. This is a reconstruction, not a recovered procedure. No surviving document gives the sequence in those exact words. The pattern comes from comparing the damaged recording with the witness accounts, the partial attendance line, and the maintenance diagrams. Those diagrams show why the sound could have mattered. The service passage did not run through the center of camp. It followed the less visible edge of the grounds, connecting utility spaces and maintenance areas with routes used by staff. Parts of it were narrow. Parts of it were enclosed. A person moving there would not need to cross the open gathering area. A sound made inside that route could emerge somewhere else, changed by wood, metal, and distance. The camp was full of such distortions. A latch could sound like a knock. A relay could click through a wall. A radio with a damaged connection could release a burst of static when another unit was keyed. A loose panel could answer a footstep with a dull impact. In darkness, a familiar place could turn an ordinary sound into an instruction. The earlier disappearance gives that possibility a sharper edge. The surviving file records 2 names for the same apparent child. One name appears in the older account. The second appears in material linked to a former camp official or staff member. The documents do not establish the exact relationship between the 2 names. They do show that the identity was not handled consistently. The missing attendance line falls near the same period. It is not merely absent from a damaged page. The omission occurs where the old disappearance and the service route begin to overlap in the surviving records. That does not prove that a child was moved through the passage. It does show that the written account became less precise at the point where movement would have mattered most. Someone had a reason to control names. Someone may also have had a reason to control where people looked. The motive remains incomplete. The records support concealment, but not its full purpose. The arrangement could have protected a responsible person. It could have kept an old disappearance from being reopened. It could have shielded a private exchange or an unauthorized movement connected to camp operations. These are theories grounded in the documents, not conclusions stated by the public record. What is clearer is the method. The signal did not need to frighten anyone. It only needed to arrive at the right moment. A counselor hearing a sound near the service route might turn toward it. A staff member might leave the group to check a radio or a utility door. A child might be moved from one position to another while the adults were counting. Even if no one intended deception, repetition could make the response automatic. That is how a practical cue becomes a ritual. The first counselors may have understood the signal as equipment. Later counselors inherited the timing without knowing its source. They learned that the count changed after the sound. They may have called the extra number because the pattern had become familiar, because someone near them expected it, or because the darkness made the group appear larger for one instant. The number 9 could have been an error shaped by movement. It could have been a warning passed through a hidden route. It could have been the spoken trace of a person who was present only outside the formal roster. The records do not permit a final choice. They do permit one rejection. The 9th count was not preserved only as a camp story repeated by strangers. It appears in the accounts of people who were present for the routine. The signal appears near it. The missing line appears near the older disappearance. These details occupy the same narrow section of the record. The former official's testimony is important for that reason. In the closure material, the role attached to this person changes across documents. Operations in one place, witness in another. A less specific staff role later. The language grows less personal as the file approaches closure. That movement is not proof of guilt. It is a documentary sign of pressure. The person who could have explained the signal was also connected, however indirectly, to the records that changed the older child's identity. The same administrative world touched the attendance sheets, the maintenance routes, and the closure account. The separation between those subjects may have been created after the fact. Outside, the grounds remain ordinary. A path holds damp gravel. Paper rustles inside a folder. A heavy iron lock presses against a hasp. Somewhere in the utility area, an old circuit gives off a faint electrical hiss before going quiet. Nothing in those sounds announces a hidden history. But the timing remains. Count 8. Pause. Signal. Count 9. Later staff members, working in a camp, altered by repairs and changes in personnel, have described the same order. Their reports are part of the present record. They do not prove that the old mechanism remains intact. They show that the sequence has survived the people who first described it. That survival creates a second problem. If the signal was made by a person, then the person had to operate a device, strike a surface, open a door, or move through the service route. If the signal was only remembered, then the memory had to pass from one season to another with unusual precision. Either explanation requires a carrier. The maps identify the route. The audio identifies the timing. The ledger identifies an omission. The closure file identifies a conflict over the past. What remains is the object that joined them. Before the box is opened, before the final testimony is read, the next examination must return to the concealed route itself. Somewhere near that passage, the signal may have left a physical trace, a worn latch, a compartment, a mark in the wood, something ordinary enough to be overlooked and specific enough to change the account. The question is no longer only who was counted. It is this: what object made the signal, and why does it appear to have continued after the person who used it was gone? The box was opened without ceremony. Its seal had yellowed at the edges. The cardboard gave off the dry smell of dust and old paper. Inside, the contents had been wrapped in brown paper and tied with cotton string. Nothing had been disturbed recently. The folds held their shape. The ink had faded to a soft gray. There were 3 items. The first was the partial head count sheet. The second was the final testimony associated with the closure. The third was a narrow strip of paper, covered in figures, abbreviations, and times. It was not identified in the file. Its upper edge had been torn away. The head count sheet belonged to an evening near the middle of the camp season. The date was legible. The names were not all complete. 8 children could be matched to the surviving roster. Beside the last written name, the line ended in a blunt, horizontal stroke. Below it, in a different pressure of pencil, was a single figure: 9. The number had been crossed out once. It had then been written again in darker graphite. That small correction changed the character of the record. It did not prove that a 9th child had been present. It did show that someone had considered the number important enough to preserve after trying to remove it. The testimony was several pages long. It had been typed by someone else, then signed by a former camp official or staff member whose identity had already appeared under 2 names in the older records. One name belonged to the camp administration. The other appeared in the file concerning the earlier disappearance. The second name was not presented as an alias in the public account. It was treated as a separate reference, a separate employee, a separate part of the camp's history. The testimony brought those references together. The writer described the evening count as a procedure. The children gathered near the ordinary meeting area. A counselor called the names. The children answered. The count reached 8. Then the counselor paused. The pause was not confusion, according to the statement. It was an interval during which the counselor waited for a sound from the service route. The sound came in the same form each time. A brief electrical hiss, 3 dull impacts, then a vibration against a hollow surface. After that, the counselor counted again. 9. The testimony did not say that a 9th child stepped forward. It said that the counselors looked toward the route before they completed the second count. The movement was described as automatic. Heads turned. 1 or more children shifted position. The group opened slightly near the edge of the gathering area. That was the moment when someone could move without crossing the center of the group. The public version had reduced the event to a tired counselor's error. The final statement contradicted that explanation in one precise way. It said the count had been corrected on paper before the children were dismissed. The instruction had come from the person using the second name. The writer did not claim to understand the reason. The statement was careful on that point. It described an order to leave the E9th count out of the attendance record. It described a second order to remove 1 line from the ledger. It did not identify who carried out the removal. It did not state what happened to the child who had disappeared years earlier, but it placed the control of the records inside the camp administration. That was not a legend. It was a documented act of concealment. The narrow strip of paper provided the next connection. Its figures matched the times on the damaged audio reel closely enough to establish sequence. The times were not exact to the minute. The reel had stretched in places, and the paper had been exposed to moisture. Even so, the order did not change. Gathering, roll call, pause, signal, movement toward the service route. Second count. The paper also contained a notation beside the signal. The word was partly erased. What remained could be read as either relay or return. The distinction mattered. A relay would describe equipment. A return would describe an instruction sent back through the route. Neither interpretation could be proved from the strip alone. The physical inspection provided more. The service route ended behind a section of wall that had been covered during a later repair. The maintenance diagram showed an access panel. The public map did not. The panel was not large. It was intended for wiring and pipe access, not for ordinary passage. Dust had collected along its upper edge. The lower edge showed repeated friction against the frame. Behind it was a shallow compartment. There was no body, no clothing, no object that could identify the missing child. The compartment contained a length of insulated wire, a corroded metal contact, and a small hand-operated switch mounted to a wooden block. The switch was connected to an old electrical circuit that no longer appeared on the current diagrams. The metal contact had been fixed against the back of the wall. When the switch was pressed, the contact struck the hollow panel. The first impact was soft. A spring returned the arm. The second and third impacts followed with slightly different spacing. The wire ran toward the utility side of the camp, where an old radio and maintenance circuit had once shared a junction. The damaged reel contained the same pattern. The match was not perfect. The recording was too damaged to establish a unique machine or a single operator. It did establish that the sound could have been made by a person using the concealed switch. The electrical hiss could have come from the old junction or from the radio equipment connected to it. The signal, in other words, had a practical explanation. It could call attention toward the route. It could tell someone inside the service area when the children were gathered. It could create a pause long enough for movement. It could also make the second count feel like a response to something outside the counselor's control. The mechanism required no unusual skill. It required access, familiarity with the layout, and a reason to keep the arrangement out of the ordinary records. The final testimony supplied that reason only indirectly. The older disappearance had created a problem for the camp's administration. The child in that file was attached to one name. The person connected to the evening instructions appeared under another. If the two names were recognized as belonging to the same person, the old account would have to be reopened. The missing ledger line would become more than a clerical gap. It would become evidence of a deliberate separation between a child, a staff record, and the person who controlled both. The testimony said the camp was closed after staff discovered that the route had been used. The public version described a temporary closure following an accident and later referred to the 9th child as camp folklore. It did not mention the switch. It did not mention the concealed compartment. It did not mention an order to alter the head count. The final statement did. Its last pages were less certain. The writer described hearing the signal after the route had been secured. The timing was the same. The sound came after the count of 8. The writer said no one had been assigned to operate the switch at that point. That portion could not be independently verified. The account was written after the closure. The witness may have been repeating a report. The old circuit may have produced an electrical discharge. A loose contact could have struck the panel. The reel could have preserved a sound made earlier and mistaken for a later event. The physical mechanism explained how the signal had begun. It did not explain every report of its continuation, nor did it establish that the earlier missing child had ever been the person counted as 9. The record showed a disappearance. They showed controlled names. They showed a concealed route and a device capable of directing attention. They did not show the child's final location. That distinction had to remain intact. Human concealment was proven. The fate of the child was not. The origin of the first signal was strongly supported. The later repetitions remained uncertain. The compartment was photographed before it was disturbed. The switch remained in place. On its wooden base, beneath the corrosion and dust, a mark had been cut into the grain. It was a short line crossed by 2 smaller lines. The same mark appeared beside the altered number 9 on the partial sheet. It also appeared in the margin of the final testimony, next to the sentence describing the instruction to leave the 9th count out of the record. That mark linked the paper to the device. It did not identify the hand that made it. The box had been silent for years. The route was sealed. The old circuit had been removed from the current plans. Yet present-day staff still reported reaching 9 after the same pause. If the switch explained the ritual, and the records showed who had hidden it, why did the count continue after the device had been disconnected? The box did not explain everything. It did something more limited and more useful. It separated the record from the story told about the record. The closure testimony established that 1 count had been removed on purpose. The partial sheet showed the alteration in faded ink. 8 names matched the roster. Beneath them, the number 9 had been written, crossed out, and written again. A line beside it carried the same carved mark found on the switch base, and beside the instruction to omit the count. That mark was not proof of who made the change. It was proof that the change belonged to a system. Someone had marked the route, the device, and the paperwork with the same sign. Someone had expected those things to be used together. The former official named in the testimony had used a second name in the records concerning the older disappearance. Publicly, the 2 identities had been treated as separate. The surviving file did not support that separation. It placed the second name near the missing line in the attendance ledger, near the altered account of the child, and near the closure material that described the camp's last season. The motive remains a reconstruction. The records do not state it plainly, but the method is clear. Names were divided. Movements were redirected. The counselors were given one version of the children present, while another version remained in a private count. The older disappearance could be kept outside the ordinary camp history if the person connected to it appeared under a different name. That is the part the evidence can carry. The service route made the arrangement possible. The compartment held the hand-operated switch, the insulated wire, and the metal contact set against the hollow wall panel. A person hidden from the main gathering area could have sent 3 impacts through the structure. The electrical hiss on the damaged reel matched the kind of brief interference such a contact could produce. The audio did not identify the operator. It did not identify the 9th child. It recorded a sequence, a pause in the count, a repeated signal, movement or attention changing after the sound. The mechanism gave that sequence a practical explanation. It also explained why the count might become a ritual. A counselor heard the cue, paused, and continued. Another counselor learned the same order from the first. The signal directed eyes toward the route, or toward the opening near it. The number 9 became attached to the moment. In time, the device could disappear while the behavior remained. The final testimony contradicts the public account in one precise detail. The count was not first recorded as a legend after the camp closed. It was removed while the camp was operating. The omission came before the story became folklore. That distinction matters. A later legend can grow from confusion. This began with an alteration. The box was closed again after the documents were compared. The timing strip was placed beside the real notes. The map was folded along its old creases. Nothing in those materials proves that the missing child was the person being counted. Nothing proves that the ninth presence was a child at all. The witnesses use that language because the count occurred during the children's evening routine. The photographs remain unchanged. They show the ordinary group. They show no visible ninth figure. The blind zone explains how a person could have remained outside the frame. It does not show that anyone stood there on every occasion. It provides a route, not a complete answer. The same limit applies to the older disappearance. The files show concealment around the name and the attendance line. They do not establish the child's final location. They do not state whether the disappearance and the later count were the same event, separated events, or connected through a person who used both for protection. The human layer is therefore settled only in outline. Someone altered the camp's account. Someone used the second name. Someone operated or arranged for the operation of the signal. The public version left those facts out. Then there is the present. The camp continues to operate in the Appalachian region. Its staff have changed. The children listed in current accounts are not the children named in the old papers. The buildings have been repaired. The routines have been carried forward because routines are efficient. Gather the group, call the names, count again before the cabins close for the night. And according to present-day staff, the count still reaches 9. They do not all describe it in the same words. Some call it a mistake. Some call it an old camp story. Some remember a pause before the last number. The available accounts agree on the result more often than they agree on its cause. The old switch was found disconnected. The wire was cut from the contactee. The route was secured. The papers that concealed the count were recovered. The people named in the closure testimony are no longer available to question. Yet the pattern survives. 8 children are accounted for. The names are checked. The photographs are taken from ordinary positions. No 9th child appears. Still, at the end of the count, there is a final beat. Sometimes it is the spoken number. Sometimes it is only the silence after 8, held a little too long, as though someone is waiting for an answer. The investigation can explain the device. It can establish the alteration. It can show how attention was moved and why the old records became thin at the exact points where the count mattered. It cannot explain why the count continued after the mechanism was disconnected. If the switch is gone, the route is secured, and the people who changed the records are gone, what is making the 9th count arrive? The camp still opens each summer. The cabins are repaired. The paths are cleared. New names appear on the roster, written in fresh ink by people who were not involved in the old records. The former staff are gone. The switch has been disconnected. The service route is secured behind a locked panel. Nothing in the present layout requires a 9th child. That is the plain conclusion supported by the evidence. Someone altered the camp's account. Someone used a second name. Someone understood the hidden route, the signal, and the value of making 8 children appear to remain 8. The closure testimony confirms that the count was omitted deliberately. The carved mark confirms that the omission belonged to a system, not a rumor. The older disappearance remains incomplete. Its file does not establish what happened after the child left the recorded path. The missing ledger line does not restore that child's name. It only shows where the record was made less useful. The human part of the mystery ends there. The rest does not. Current counselors describe the evening count in the same careful language used by the earlier witnesses. They gather the children. They check the roster. They count the faces in front of them. The number reaches 8. Then there is a pause. It is not long. Sometimes it is blamed on wind moving through the trees. Sometimes on a counselor looking down at the sheet. sometimes on an old habit passed between staff members who no longer know its source. The audio reel contains a pause like that. After it came the signal. The signal could be explained once. A switch, a wire. 3 impacts through a service structure. Electrical hiss carried along a route built by people. But the route is closed now. The equipment is disconnected. And still, the count continues. On a recent evening, according to the present staff account, the counselor reached 8 and stopped. The children stood in a loose line near the gathering area. Paper rustled in the cold, salt wind. Somewhere beyond the cabins, a loose metal fitting tapped against a post. No figure was seen. No photograph captured one. The counselor said the number 9 anyway. A moment later, something answered from the dark side of the camp. Not a voice, not clearly, just one dry impact, followed by a thin electrical hiss. The sound came from the direction of the secured route. The record is no longer silent. It names the alteration. It identifies the method. It shows that the camp's history was managed by human hands. It still does not say who or what is being counted.